Okay, now I want to talk a little bit about the history of Planet X. When originally our solar system looked different than it does today. Mars was about where we are in our orbit, and at that point Mars was perfectly habitable, just like we have theoretical projections that there used to be water on Mars and this, that, and the other. And what we now call the Earth was at that time a planet bigger than this called Tiamat, and it was in between Mars and Jupiter, about in the area of what we call the asteroid belt. And the hairy Neanderthals lived on that planet at that time. The Planet X was captured by our system, and it began to, every 3,600 years, it would pass in, and finally its orbit began to stabilize. But there was a period during the first 12 or 13 or so of its orbit where it passed close to Earth and caused some havoc in the solar system. Well, on one of its passages through the system, one of its moonlets collided with Tiamat in what's now our Pacific Ocean and blew that whole section of the planet out into what is now the asteroid belt. All the little rocks of the asteroid belt used to be what's in our Pacific Ocean. And we captured a satellite from Planet X called Kingu, which is now our moon. We have legends from the Greeks that they lived on Earth at a period of time before there was a moon in the sky. Now, whether that refers to our real moon or whether it refers to Planet X as a stationary northern night sun moon, I don't know. But there is that legend to back that idea up. And at that point, Earth got knocked out of its orbit farther out from the sun and moved into this current orbit that we're in. And Mars, in the same disaster, got knocked way out to where it is now. And all the life on Mars ended. Well, our planet heated up because we were closer into the sun. The hairy Neanderthals began to not fit in anymore. They eventually went extinct. And during all of this this early havoc in the early Planet X time of the solar system, when they got knocked out of their orbit around Sirius B, their heat shield they have around their planet was damaged. Now, whether they built this heat shield to help them withstand the implosion of the red giant, or whether that was something that had to do with preserving heat internally on their planet because of their cold, dark orbit. When they get way off from the sun, they're going to have a cold planet. And if they're reptiles, they would either go into hibernation or they have to have some way to keep themselves warm so they wouldn't go into hibernation. Because when the temperature drops down to about 40 degrees, reptiles, whether they like it or not, they hibernate, you know. In fact, we were joking the other day at my group on the internet, you know, if we could only develop some kind of stun gun or something for these Anunnaki from Planet X, and we could get the temperature down to freezing real quick, like zap them and freeze them, that they would go into temporary hibernation. We could escape from if we needed to. Well, anyway, their heat shield was damaged, and so the first thing that they did when they got here was send an expedition down to Earth led by their Emperor Anu and his sons, Crown Prince Enlil and Prince Enki. They landed in the Persian Gulf right around Kuwait, and they went ashore. We have legends from that area of these reptilian-like aquatic beings that landed there from Sirius. It's developed in those books about Sirius. And they began to search the planet for gold. Well, we've got plenty of gold. They needed gold for their heat shield. And they found out quickly that Earth is just full of gold. That could be one of our values in the greater universe. We may not even realize how valuable all the gold is we have here. And so they discovered where they could mine it, and they began to mine it. Well, they're bigger than we are. They're, you know, they average 15, 20 feet tall, and it's very hard. It was very hard work for them to get down in mines and mine that gold. Dirty work. And the Anunnaki, the people of that planet are called Anunnaki. The Anunnaki gold miners revolted and refused to mine any more gold. So Emperor Anu and Empress Antu, his consort, called an emergency meeting of the Council of 12, their ruling council, and they decided that they were going to create a slave by fusing their genetics with the Neanderthal 8-man genetics and create a small being that would be cloned and sent down into the gold mines to mine the gold for them. And so they created what they call the adamu prototype. And at that time, there was no female, and so all of these cloned adamus had to be incubated in the wombs of Anunnaki women, and so some of these women were designated as birth goddesses, and all they did day in and day out for years and centuries was incubate little slave adamus for gold mining purposes. Finally, the birth goddesses just got sick of it, and they revolted, and they refused to incubate any more adamus. So they had to have another emergency meeting, and then they decided that they were going to create a female adamu. They called her the Eva, and they created her. They have a queen named Ninkursag, who's their chief medical officer. She's known in Greek history as Hera. She's known in Egyptian history as Isis. Her true name is Ninkursag, and she's their chief geneticist. And she got together with Prince Enki, who is the son of Emperor Anu. And Prince Enki donated his sperm, and they found a really beautiful Neanderthal female. And they took her egg, and they combined the egg of the Neanderthal with the sperm of Prince Enki, and they created the Eva, and that's how they also created the Adamu. Now they had two, and they were split right down, perfect hybrids, 50-50 split between the Solarion side and the Earth side, the Neanderthal side. Well, they were like mules. They tried to mate them, but they wouldn't mate. They couldn't produce babies. So they were in a quandary. What do we do next? So they had to undo that hybridization a little bit. They had to either favor the Saurian side of the hybrid or the Earth side of the hybrid in order to create beings that could produce their own young. And they reluctantly gave us maybe about 60 to 65% of tiamat or Neanderthal genetics and 30 to 35% of the Saurian genetics. So, therefore we have hair on our heads, for example, or some of us, and hair on our chests instead of our backs like animals do. Skin that's relatively smooth, like a lizard skin. If you've ever felt a lizard, they have very smooth skin. Chameleons, very smooth skin. Anyway, then they could mate, and they had them there in Eden, where their spaceport was. It was in Kuwait, right in southern Iraq today. They had them there, and as the Bible tells us, they disobeyed. They were supposed to just stay in the garden and run around and mate. But they ate of the tree that they weren't supposed to eat of, or they partook of some elixir that they were not supposed to drink of, and they got kicked out. And the Saurians themselves did not really like the situation they found themselves in, and I don't think they've really liked us very much after that, because we have legends that they think we stink, and that we make too much noise, and so on and so forth. But that's how we Cro-Magnon humans came into existence, and the Neanderthals, as we all know, eventually died out, and scientists today have no idea where we came from. We have no direct link back to any other. We just like suddenly popped up on the scene. I mean, everybody will admit that. And they're desperately trying to figure out some way that we could have gotten here without the intervention of a god or an ancient astronaut or something like that. Then life kind of went on. We were the perfect little slave labor. We were breeding our own little slaves for their use. They had gold mines operating in South Africa, and they would kidnap or capture somehow or another these Middle Easterners, and they would ferry them down to the underworld, which meant they would fly them in flying ships down to the southern hemisphere, the underside, for work in the gold mines, which were full of smelters, fieriness, heat, hell. You know? That's where that idea came from, I feel convinced. And one of the head of that ferrying operation, that shipping operation, was someone named Duke Demuzi. He's known in Greek mythology as Adonis. And he was a consort of Princess Royal Inanna, who's a favorite of the emperor. And she's known as Aphrodite, Hathor in Egypt, the most beautiful of the goddesses. And Adonis, the most handsome of the gods. Well, they were having a love affair. And she was the air fleet commander at their main airport in Baalbek, Lebanon, on the top of that. If you've ever seen a picture of Baalbek, it's a huge mesa-like plateau, which I have been to. That's where they had their airship operation. And her brother and lover, secret lover, Prince Utu, who's known as Apollo in Greek mythology, he was the space commander of the spaceport in the Sinai Desert. Well, Emperor Anu and Empress Antu possess what are called Me's. I'll write that down. I call it me because that's what it is in English. It could be pronounced meh or ma or any other thing. But we know it's M-E. We don't know what it is. So we can't translate it because we don't know what it is. But the emperor and the empress are the only ones that have a me, some kind of object. And they use this object to keep all the other ones on their planet, mainly the upper class elite, the dukes and duchesses and the higher class, keep them in control, Not for any evil purpose, but just to maintain order on the planet. And whoever is in possession of the Medes is automatically considered the emperor and empress. Well, several thousand years ago, evil Baron Marduk and his wife, Baroness, his consort, I should say, consort Baroness Sarpani, they were known in Greek as Belus and Achinoe, I think. They somehow or another captured the Medes from Emperor Anu and Empress Antu, and they declared themselves emperor and empress. And all the other gods and goddesses were outraged over it. And it started what were called the Pyramid Wars, when they fought with each other and they had tribes on Earth fighting on their side. And during the Pyramid Wars, Duke Demuzi was murdered by Baron Marduk. And one of their key rules of conduct on their planet is, thou shalt not kill. And that was a terrible crime from their standpoint. And so they didn't know what to do about it. They finally defeated Baron Marduk and Baroness Sarpani and got the Medes back for Emperor Anu and Empress Antu. Then they captured Baron Marduk and imprisoned him in the Great Pyramid of Egypt and just left him there. They couldn't execute him because they didn't believe in killing. So they thought, we'll just put him in the pyramid, starve him, he'll just starve to death on his own. So that's what they did, and they left him there for a while, and then they finally forgave him or whatever. let him out, provided that he would never cause any more trouble. And so far he hasn't, that we know of. And during those pyramid wars, the Sinai spaceport got blown up. Prince Utu blew it up because his sister Inanna was one of the chief enemies of Baron Marduk, and they blew the Sinai spaceport up so that Baron Marduk wouldn't have use of it when he was temporarily in command as emperor. So after the wars were over, they needed a new spaceport, and their gold supply in southern Africa was being exhausted, so they decided to move their whole gold mining operation and space facility to South America. And so what we now call the Nazca Plain was their new spaceport. If you've ever seen a picture of the Nazca Plain, you know what I'm talking about. One of those runways at Nazca is 10 miles long. That's longer than we need at any of our airports. You can't see those structures from the ground. You only see them from the air. When you're approaching Nazca from the Pacific Ocean, you go over the Bay of Pisco, you'll see a trident carved onto the cliffs of the Bay of Pisco. That's the trident of Poseidon. You think, well, how in the world did the trident of Poseidon get carved on a cliff in South America? Poseidon was a Greek god, you know. Well, Poseidon was also the same as Prince Enki. And Prince Enki was the one who was put in charge of the new space facilities and gold mining operations in Peru. So that's why the trident was put on the side of the cliff to point the way toward the Nazca runway. I'm not going to break it. I'm just going to keep going for at least a while. And then they eventually abandoned that. Probably when they left the last time, around 687 BCE, following the great eclipse and the great earthquake. That's when their sequence of departure started. They just all abandoned the planet. And here we left with it. You know, I got in an argument the other day on the internet with somebody who thought that I was just being preposterous by suggesting that astronauts from another world came down here and built the Nazca Plain. You know, I'm looking at it, well, to those primitive Incans, they couldn't even invent a wheel. How could they go out and design a complex landing structure like that they couldn't even see from the ground to start with? I mean, a friend of mine in Dallas used to be in the Peace Corps in Peru, and he's been to Nazca, and he's flown out over it. He's seen it with his own eyes. He's seen it from the air, and he says, if you know it's there on the ground, you can kind of look for it, but you don't have any idea what those little shallow trenches are for. You can't tell from the ground what it is. Yes, I am going to break again right here.
Okay, we're going to have a short break, 5-minute break.
Yeah, it's still recording. Okay, long before Zecharia, sitchin, or Emanuel Velikovsky came on the scene, back during the 19th century, after they discovered the planet Neptune, they realized that Neptune's orbit wobbled a little bit, and they didn't know exactly why. So, using physics, they determined that the only thing that could be causing that wobbling in Neptune's orbit was the existence of another planet, as yet undiscovered, that had to be about 5 times bigger than the Earth on a long, slow orbit to cause that disturbance in Neptune's orbit. So they started looking for it, because that was that time of great scientific exploration at the last part of the 18th century. I mean, really, that was a terrific time. And so, finally, I mean, the existence of this planet was not considered to be any, cultish or anything like that. It was just, let's find it. We know it's there. Let's find it. And so they started looking for it. And in the process, in 1930, Percival Lowell, I think, discovered or William Tombaugh. Well, planet Pluto was discovered in the course of looking for this planet X, as they call it, which is how the name got started. And when they discovered Pluto, they knew that Pluto was not big enough to cause those perturbations in the orbit of Neptune. So they knew they discovered a new planet, but they still knew they had not found the one they were really looking for. And that was 1930. And the U.S. Naval Observatory in Washington, D.C., and some of the other observatories, they never stopped looking for us. I mean, when my website first went up, I had all kinds of hits from the U.S. Navy, and it had to have been from the U.S. Naval Observatory. You know, the Army, there weren't, I mean, you could say, well, some Navy guy saw your website and told his buddies, and they all went and looked at your website. Well, the Army didn't do it, and the Air Force didn't do it, and the Marines didn't do it. Only the Navy did it, and only the Navy's got that big observatory in Washington, D.C. So I figured that the Navy would just check and see what I had to say about the things they had been looking for for 100 years, you know, and they didn't find in 1930 when they found Pluto, and we still haven't found it. And so now you've got critics who have thought, well, we've been looking for all this time, we still haven't found it, so therefore those disturbances in Neptune's orbit must have just been normal. There is no other planet out there, we would have discovered it. And another thing about the discovery of planet X, if the planet doesn't reflect any light, then we couldn't see it, no matter how close it was. It has to reflect light. It could be that it's a dark planet, even though it's got that heat shield. It's a dark planet, and it's just too far away still and too dark. There is a Greek riddle that goes this way. My cloak I shed in the light of my reflection. My grand entrance I make after the serpent appears. Then they will know me. Well, it could be that this thing comes in, and then just all of a sudden it gets close enough to the sun where it just blazes out. Decloaks. My cloak I shed in the light of my reflection. So it's obviously referring to that, I think. Right now we have a lot of comets coming in and out of this system. We've had 3 in just the last 6 months, and 2 of them were up there together, very close in the north. The entire solar system is heating up. I mean, everybody criticizes Al Gore's film on global warming as being a lot of hullabaloo or hocus pocus or whatever, because he doesn't take into account Mars is warming up. I mean, there's nobody driving an SUV on Mars to heat up Mars. Well, I mean, that's 2 different things. I mean, there is no doubt that we humans are causing global warming of some extent. But, nevertheless, the whole solar system is heating up. Mars, its ice caps have been shrinking. Jupiter's hotter. Neptune's hotter. Venus is hotter. They've already measured all of this, and nobody knows why the whole solar system is heating up. Either we're moving through a warm area in space as just part of our movement around the galaxy, or some object is approaching that's causing us to heat up. Well, we're getting closer to this, 3,600 years, and we've got things happening that we can't explain. It's just a matter of waiting. And somebody mentioned Sitchin's end of days. I read this year. I totally disagree with some of it. Sitchin puts the last departure of that planet X in 556 during an eclipse of the sun. There was an eclipse of the sun on the date in 556, which he talks about. But by 556, we were keeping very accurate historical records in Rome and Greece and Egypt and Assyria and Babylonia and all over the place. And if something as momentous as Planet X had come in and gone at that point, there would have been some historical records. I mean, that was just before Plato, and all, you know, not too long before Alexander the Great. We were keeping very good records of history at that point. There's nothing there. Now back over here to this. this date of 15 June 762 BCE. Dr. Velikovsky in Worlds in Collision put the first Mars catastrophe, as he called it, in 747. Well, one of the reasons I wrote my treatise on reconstructed history was to demonstrate that you can't use Dr. Velikovsky's date of 747 and mathematically get the history to fall into place correctly. You have to use the date of 762. And it just so happens, and there was a terrific, very visible solar eclipse that passed from Morocco, across the Mediterranean, across Greece and Egypt, Turkey, southern Russia, on into China. So that if you took a path of 300 miles and drew it across the world like that, all the major civilizations would have been in the path of that eclipse of the sun. It was known as the Great Eclipse. The Hebrews referred to it as the Great Earthquake. It occurred in the reign of King Hezekiah, I think. I can refer to this. But it's one of those times one of the few times in our history where we can actually link our chronology of history to a verifiable scientific event, like an eclipse of the sun. Therefore, if somebody said that this eclipse of the sun occurred in the 4th year of King so-and-so, you can date the 4th year of King so-and-so at 762, and then work from that out both ways, from Alexander the Great all the way back to the Exodus, working out from the known date. Say, well, the king before that ruled for 28 years, therefore he started then, and if that doesn't, but then that king was contemporaneous with Syrian king so-and-so, who was in his 2nd year when he took office, and you have to match the 2nd year of the Syrian king to the 3rd year of this one, and you interlock them up and down. There may be a few places where it doesn't work, and you have to adjust them, but you can't do it with the date of 747. And significantly, Dr. Velikovsky said that Mars cycled around in 25-year periods from 747 to 687, when it stabilized and there was no more trouble. That was when King Sennacherib's army was destroyed in the Sinai. Well, I mean, there are 4 periods of 15 years between 747 and 687. But significantly, from 762 to 747, there's another period of 15 years. But Dr. Velikovsky really kind of played down 762, which I thought was really a terrible thing on his part to do. But he was fixated on that date of 747, and he wrote 2 books, Ages and Chaos and Oedipus and Akhenaten, and it took it down to about 850, from the Exodus all the way down to about 850 BC. And then he started another one, Ramses II, in his time, which picked up the duplication with the Ramses 19th dynasty duplicated with the 26th dynasty, and took it on down in 2 more books to Alexander the Great. He intended to write a 5th book and put it right in the middle from about 850 to about 650. Which includes this period. And it was going to be called the Syrian Conquest. He never published it. And I think he never published it because he never could get the mathematics right to fit his theory of 747. And when I first finished my treatise on, I call it A Mathematical Analysis of Ancient History. When I finished it, I finished it in the summer of 79. And I sent a copy to Dr. Velikovsky. He should have gotten one in August of 79. He died in November of 79. Whether he read it or not, whether he realized that somebody somewhere out there had figured it out, I don't know. I would really love to know that. I hope he died knowing that guy in Texas got the math right, and it will live on. He knows I made a mistake, but the thing is, Dr. Velikovsky's overall stuff is just so magnificent. So what if he messed up the date? I couldn't have even written about it if I hadn't had his basic ideas to work from to start with. In that Greek legend that I just quoted, it said, my grand entrance I make after the serpent appears. As if there are two objects that are going to show up. A serpent's going to show up, and then something else is going to show up. Well, in the Scandinavian mythology, we have two objects that battle in the sky. A Fenrir wolf and a Midgard serpent. In the Mayan mythology, we have two objects that battle in the sky. An eagle and a flying serpent. In the Hopi Indian mythology, we have two objects. The red kachina and the blue kachina. So, I have a feeling that the serpent, the Midgard serpent, or the flying serpent, is going to be here first. And, you know, it could be that one of them is the giant mothership that Sitchin writes about, and the other one is the planet itself. And it just appears that they're doing battle because they're up there whizzing around each other or something. To a primitive human with no idea of space flight to start with, they wouldn't. If a spaceship were to land on an object up there, it could have been like zapping it with a missile or something. Looked like a battle when it really wasn't. I don't know. We'll just have to find that out. But yeah, we are clearly alerted in Greek, Hopi, Mayan, and Scandinavian mythology of two objects that are coming. And it could be that Planet X just comes in, does its normal little loop around the sun, and it leaves a huge, even Earth-sized spaceship up above our North Pole, and that just sits there for 900 years, and then in those 15-year cycles it gets slingshot momentum every 15 years until finally, after several of those 15-year cycles, it gets enough momentum to take it back out far enough to join up with this planet again. Where does Planet X go when it's at the opposite end of its orbit from here? You know, every 1800 years, where is it? Or in the midpoint? Well, it could be one of two places. It could be, a lot of people speculate that it goes, it's the aphelion of its orbit, the Kuiper belt of comets, where all the other comets arise. That could well be true. I don't know. But on the other hand, it could be that, and this is a little far-fetched even to me, but I'm not ruling it out. It could be that it spends 900 years here, travels 900 years back to its home in Sirius system, stays there for 900 and comes back here for another 900 years. I have the mathematics of that worked out in my book to show you what speed the planet would have to be traveling if it stayed 900 years here and then stayed 900 years at Sirius. But we don't know where it goes to. Velikovsky said that Venus object came from Jupiter. The Enuma Elish Sumerian tradition says that Planet X, Planet Nibiru, the planet of the crossing. Nibiru means crossing. Let crossing be his name. So it crosses over from somewhere to somewhere. Maybe from Sirius back here, back again. Is that what's meant by crossing? There's a ferryman involved with that mythology, like some object ferries it across the crossing. We don't know what that is yet. Nevertheless, and I lost my train of thought.
Only happens because geniuses.
Yeah, that's what that's a good example of how I can be talking about one thing and get ahead of myself and then blank on where I was before. But, yeah, where does it come from and its speed? Yeah, we just don't know that yet. And it gets back to, are they going to tell us? I mean, that's the only way we'll ever find out, is if they let us know. So, does anybody have any questions? That just about finishes up my summary lecture here.
In some of Zachariah's work, I don't know if it was a video or where it was, but he got an appointment with the NASA director when Mr. Goldman was the head of NASA several years ago, and when he went in to talk to Mr. Goldman. Mr. Goldman had all of his works, his books and stuff on his desk, and they were talking. They were talking about planetx, and I don't remember whether Mr. Goldman admitted straight out that they was aware of it or whatever, but it seemed like he insinuated. I mean, his impressions that he got from Dr. Goldman was that they knew about it.
I don't see how they could possibly not know about it. I mean, I have a little thing at my website, a little short little article that somebody sent in an email years ago, and I just put it up and it's called, "What About Planet X?" This woman claimed to have been at a cocktail party of astronomers in New Orleans. And she walked over to somebody and was talking to him. She said, "Well, what about Planet X?" And this astronomer got very nervous. He said, "What about it?" You know? And he wouldn't talk to her. He just shut up. Wouldn't talk to her anymore. But look at it this way. Say it comes back and it causes all kinds of devastation, like it usually does, and a polar axis shift and so forth. If the government knows about it, I really kind of think it's best for the government to not say anything about it. Because if it does, people would stop going to work, they'd panic, we'd have anarchy on this planet. Especially in maybe some of the more enlightened countries of Western Europe, North America, we might be able to accept it a little bit more. But I mean, you take people like in Iraq or they're madmen anyway. They'll think it's the Mahdi coming back. It'll cause worldwide panic.
Well, you know.
And so, yeah, I'm all for it. I'm all for it.
Well, it's going to have to get out.
Yeah, you know, one of these, when we can finally see it with our own eyes, and there's no denying it, then they can tell us. And yeah, I've got a list of emergency supplies made out, because once it comes back and we know it's coming, it would behoove all of us to go stock up on some things in advance. You know, batteries, light bulbs, water. You know, basic survival necessities, and you know, don't hesitate to max out your credit cards. I mean, banks are not going to max them all out, get everything you can get hands on.
I'll give you something else, though.
Thank you, Robert.
I was a Navy wife for 23 years.
Pardon me?
I was a Navy wife for 23 years, working with my husband's carrier. And the thing is, you look at what the Navy has done. They're closing down San Francisco, Los Angeles, San Diego, Florida, Houston. They're moving inland. Why? Because this is why the Navy wives said that a lot of these bases were refurbished before they closed them down. But yet they're closing down. Why? You know, they're moving to the Great Lakes. Why? Why are they moving their prime ports from where they've used them inland? That doesn't make sense. The Navy doesn't come from
I didn't know that. I'm going to have to look
at it.
Yeah.
Look at it. Because a lot of the Navy
they're
moving there.
Flooding.
So, yeah. And they're talking about this stuff doesn't, you know, the government says they don't know. They do know. They do know. They do know. And there's, you know, like I said, I ran with an awful lot of different people, but one of the ones when I was in San Diego is a lot of script scientists. And and they were part of a group called the Radical Free Radicals. Now, these men are all older scientists now, but back 30 years ago when I was running with them, and they're putting this stuff forward. And then we're seeing it in the Navy. We're seeing all this stuff happen. We're saying, don't tell me this government doesn't know. Don't tell me they don't know.
Well, you know, like, for instance, on the West Coast, I wanted to show you something here. Okay, you've got the world turning on its axis like this. Okay, I'll turn it to where you can see the U.S. Okay, now it stops. All right, it's going like this and stops. All the water will be sloshing from the oceans over the west coasts of everything, and the water will be sloshing away from the east coasts of everything. That's, you know, that's the minimum that would happen. And then you have your polar axis shifts due to the magnetic forces of planet X. It shifts that way. And then it starts back up again. And then it starts back up again. And then you're going to have the water, it's going to slosh back over the east coast and back away from the west coast. So you're going to have this. So I would say you probably need to be inland 100, 200 miles to avoid that sloshing. And then look here, look at where we're going to be next time. Below the equator.
Well, we're in a good place there.
Well, I think here in East Texas we have very good survival possibilities. Yeah. We have very good drainage. I mean, you know, every once in a while there'll be isolated flooding in little low areas here and there, but we don't ever have mega floods where there's standing water for miles in all directions. The Sulphur River, White Oak Creek, they are very good drainage. And we are far enough, we are high enough, if the polar ice were to melt, all of it, it would flood everything up to an elevation of 250 feet. Well, Mount Pleasant is 365 feet. Avery's probably close to that. The Marvin Nichols Dam is going to be something like 400 feet completely. And so, yeah, we're just above 250. We're far enough inland, and we're also, even if it's, we're 300 miles from the Gulf, but we're only about 400 feet in elevation, so it's just a gentle rise up like that.
Yeah.
And so we're far enough to avoid any sloshing, high enough to avoid any flooding from melting ice. And we've only got one little earthquake fault that runs through here. It runs right under where Sulphur River meets Highway 259. It's
Army Depot, we found that fault, and I have this in our photography in engineering. That fault is active.
Yeah, but we don't ever feel any terrific quakes from it. Although it is active enough to cause the highways to crack.
Yes.
That's why there's all this highway work around here. So yeah, whether we would have any disasters from that earthquake fault, I don't know. I really doubt it. I mean, I would hate to be in California, for example. You know, you get
the one that runs down to St. Louis. Chicago.
The New Madrid fault.
So it did an offshoot from that.
One time, about 100 years ago, that there was a big earthquake right around the New Madrid Fault, and they felt, and it rang the church bells as far away as Boston. You know?
It was felt in Texas. I'm just wondering if that's not another fault line coming off of it from when it. I think it's a possibility.
It probably comes off. The one through here?
Yes.
The one through here probably is a minor one coming off the southern part of that one, coming down through Arkansas and down in through.
You know, the Indians have sayings about towards the last days or the end days. There will be a house built in the sky.